That's better, right? Okay. So I've appeased Zoom, so it now wants me to. I'm now able to share my screen. So fantastic! Thank you everybody for joining me. I want to talk about supercharging Salesforce DevOps Center. So a little bit of background. I've been around the ecosystem about 20 years. The reason we talk about DevOps Center is that Elements.Cloud was involved in building a partner extension. So we were on the pilot for DevOps Center, and obviously now it's in open beta. So for those of you who don't know about DevOps Center, it's the replacement for change sets. So it's a free replacement for change sets. So if you think about the ecosystem of, there are about 70,000 organizations that are using change sets at the moment. So again, wide applicability. Important things, free, and secondly, it's in open beta at the moment. So anybody can install it and start using it. So what I want to do is spend a bit of time talking about the principles behind DevOps Center, the thinking behind it, then spend some time, maybe do a quick demo so you can actually see it. But also, I want to make sure that we don't lose the opportunity to improve the way we operate. So rather than just taking change sets out and pushing DevOps Center in, there's an opportunity at this point to go, wow, okay, we've got a change in our organization to work with DevOps Center. Now's the chance to actually improve the way we operate. So I want to spend a bit of time about how we might use the change into DevOps Center as a catalyst for improving the way we actually do our overall development lifecycle. Hence the term supercharging DevOps Center. Again, anybody wants to ask questions, I'm happy to do that as we go along. If you want to hit me up on either LinkedIn or Twitter, Ian Gotts is pretty easy to go and find. So by all means, connect with me there. So the first thing is, what was the vision of DevOps Center? So Karen Fidelak was the product manager for DevOps Center. She works for Salesforce. She has a team. They've been building DevOps Center probably for the last 2 years. And for them, it's all about the change and release management. It's all about replacing change sets, and it's trying to encourage DevOps best practices. And the other really important part, it's making sure that the admins who are used to using change sets are working to the same principles, the same best practices as the pro-code developers who are maybe in the IDE, using a source control system, pushing data in and out, metadata around using scripts. So it's trying to get everybody on the same page. So that's the first thing. The current release, so everything I'm talking about is in the current release in open beta. The current release really is only focused on the Salesforce platform. So it's not able to manage, say, data that's held as metadata that's held as data. It's not able to manage changes through Tableau. It's purely the core platform. But as I'm going through, I will talk about things where some of the future ideas that have been talked about. Clearly, I don't work for Salesforce, although I think you need to assume this is all under sort of safe harbor. So that's the vision. The vision is moving away from change sets, moving the 70,000 plus organizations using change sets and giving them a more declarative, an easier to operate system. So I'll talk about some of the features. Obviously, you can go and play, you can go and install DevOps Center in your org, you can start using it. But I want to talk about really some of the features that DevOps Center has, so at least you understand the scope of what's being delivered. So the first thing is they're actually about driving change with a modern UI. So instead of change sets where you create a change set, then you move, add a metadata, add another meta, it's trying to actually do more drag and drop in terms of that UI. The second thing is we're trying to seamlessly integrate this with version control. So typically, if you're a pro-code developer, you are used to using version control, pushing in and out of, say, GitHub or Bitbucket or Azure DevOps. This is making sure that the admins are actually now using version control. So current release, the one that's actually in open beta, only works with GitHub. There was some talk about extending it in the future. That may be a paid feature for maybe Bitbucket and then other source control systems. So day one, where it is at the moment, it's GitHub only. But it does mean that if your developers are using GitHub, then your admins will then be pushing metadata in and out of exactly the same repository. And the beauty of this is that you don't need to have any knowledge of GitHub if you're an admin. All that heavy lifting for GitHub is being done behind the scenes. So you don't need to worry about it. You don't need to become a GitHub expert. The other point is about moving changes across environments. So this is all about building a pipeline. So you can move changes between each of the different stages or the different orgs in the pipeline very easily, because you just create the one work item and then it just moves its way along the pipeline. So again, these may be some new concepts if you're an admin, the concept of actually creating a work item, which is a set of metadata, the second concept of pipelines, and the third concept of source control. So the last point here about working with hybrid teams, that's all about being able to have the same approach from both low code and pro code developers. You're all working to the same approach. And the image over there on the right-hand side, you can see a particular work item with some metadata, and the little inset is actually the idea of a pipeline. Don't worry about that. I'll show you when we start to get into the demo about how some of this works. Now, if you're used to using, say, a more sophisticated CI/CD product like a gear set or Capado, Flowsum, AutoRabbit, this is not a sophisticated product like that. This really is a replacement for change sets in its current release. So don't look for automation, don't look for conflict resolution, lots of different integrations. This is a fairly basic product, but the important thing is it's the first step towards building a really comprehensive change management solution. One of the things that the team have done with DevOps Center is they've made it easy for partners to extend it. So we're one of the partners who came out with an extension to DevOps Center, because it's just it's a Heroku app running on top of Salesforce with custom objects that you can look at with no effort effort from Salesforce. We were able to build an integration by looking at the data model, looking at how the automation worked, interpreting that, then working at building some data models, building the process flows so we understood how it worked, and then we were able to build an integration from our current products into DevOps Center. So that was the vision. I talked a little bit about the features. We didn't take very long because actually the features are relatively limited in terms of what you can see. There are only 4 screens, and I rather jokingly said to Karen, like, what have you been doing for 2 years? There are only four screens. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of work being done to make sure it manages the pipelines, manages the work items, manages the metadata, and more importantly, manages the data, the pushing the data in and out of GitHub. So I said that this is an opportunity. Yes, you're going to have to change. So if you're an admin or you've got a heavily admin focused team, they're going to need to think about how they group metadata items into work items, how work items may be grouped into a release, but also the whole concept of pushing stuff in and out of Git. So let's not lose that opportunity. Now's the chance to rethink some of the things which you've been doing around driving change. Salesforce has become increasingly complex. So when I started in Salesforce in 2001, there were 5 objects. Really simple. There were no sandboxes. There was no app exchange. Now, Salesforce is a very sophisticated application, tightly integrated into third-party systems, lots of metadata that gets changed. Flow enables you to do a huge amount in terms of automation, but then functions enables you to start to call external applications. We're now building a complex application which is strategic. We can't get away with banging a few things straight into production or moving things through change sets. So now is the opportunity to start to move to a more sophisticated way of thinking about that application lifecycle. And this is the absolute classic chance to do that. So if we think about the typical application lifecycle, you may have seen this diagram maybe in some Trailhead badges or in other articles. This is the sort of what people talk about application lifecycle management. And the first issue here is this is kind of wrong. Not that the steps aren't correct, but actually the relative sizes of each of those quadrants is incorrect. The amount of planning, all the upfront design, architecture, requirements capture, all that business analysis is clearly quite a large activity. Coding, whether it's declarative or hard coding, is quite a large activity compared with merge and test and unity and release. And the important thing is that all of these activities need to go on. Now, I think the big opportunity actually is I get to the next screen. There we go. That's the opportunity. The opportunity is that I don't think people do a particularly good job in our current world of that planning. People, and myself included, keen to rush to start building things. There's a massive opportunity to actually make sure that we do the upfront business analysis, the upfront architecture, the upfront user design correctly before we start building. And it's very easy with Salesforce to say, oh, just start building an object, just start building a field. Yeah, I get it's easy to do, but if you are building quickly and not building the right thing, it's taking time. You're losing the trust of the users who you deliver it and they go, well, that's not quite what I wanted. And it's not good enough to go, okay, I'll fix it really quickly, because that's burning up cycles. You're losing the trust of the users. You're losing the opportunity time of, it takes another 2 days, 3 days, you're losing that time for the business users who've got the benefits. What we're discovering, and I think if you think about the recent certification, the business analysis certification, that's all about doing the upfront requirements capture, doing the upfront user process modeling, the design, the architecture design, and then building user stories. Doing all of that correctly and taking the time to do it means that the build phase will happen faster. That means that the adoption will go up. So it's fantastic that we now have a business analysis certification. The fact there's a user design certification, the fact that Salesforce is putting a lot of energy into the well-architected program says that this plan phase is really important. And if you're not doing a good job of business analysis, if you find that user adoption suffering, people, you're building stuff which is not what the users want. You're building things and you're breaking the org because you didn't understand the implication of making changes. Now is the time to use the DevOps Center change to rethink and actually get your senior management on board to say, look, we've got to fix some of this upfront business analysis. We will deliver stuff faster if you give us more time to do the planning, and then we can code more quickly. Then we can do the coding. So that previous phase is we call build the right things. Sorry, build the things right. Then we build. So that's the first one is building the right things. The second one is building the things right. So I'll pause there for a moment just before, and if there are any questions or any thoughts, let me see if I can find the chat window. By all means, throw questions in the chat, or you can just take yourself off mute and ask any questions.
Yeah, so far I don't see any questions. So yeah.
Okay.
So let's continue. Sure.
Configuration, maybe it's called org discovery. But then the cycle starts with capturing and validating requirements, where we're defining some requirements, some process maps, some entity relationship diagrams. We're defining some work items. That's what our user stories are. We're assessing the impact of those user story changes. We can then push those into build, configure, through test, where we've got some documented changes. We're then putting them into production. We're measuring the adoption. We're actually identifying new feedback and going around the cycle. So the purple boxes are this analysis, and this first blue box, or the two blue boxes, really is where DevOps Center comes in. So one little concept that comes out a lot is the concept called shift left. this idea of the later you find problems, the more expensive they are to fix. So the traditional level of work, don't do very much analysis, rush into it, build load of work in deploy and release because we're finding problems, and the cost of fixing those problems, as you can see for the green line, is going up and up. Shift left says, let's do more work up front in the analysis phases, so therefore there's less work in test, deploy, and release. And therefore the work we're doing actually is costing us less overall. Right? And again, there's a lot written about shift left. Again, not a difficult concept. Quite difficult to apply when you've got business users going, well, why aren't you making that change? Well, I mean, fine. How hard can it be? All I need is a pick list. Just add a new pick list value. And you need to fight against that to go, no, I'm not going to put a new pick list value in. I really want to understand what your business requirements are. I always talk about the analysis is a great way of saying no by saying yes. The answer is absolutely. I'll happily make those changes. But before we do that, can I just understand why you need that pick list value? Maybe you've heard of the concept of the 5 whys. You are like the annoying child. Why, but why, but why, but why? Those 5 whys. So why do you need this pick list value? Oh, because we're trying to track a different sort of opportunity. Fantastic. So why do we need this new opportunity? Okay. And as you start getting into more questions, there will maybe one of 3 answers. The first answer is, in understanding the business process that the end user wants to change, they may discover that, by the way, the application you've got already does that. And they go, oh, I just didn't realize. Fantastic. You've solved their problem with no effort whatsoever. The second thing might be, as you start going through that requirements capture, understanding the business process with the end user, they will discover it isn't a new pick list value. It's actually a whole new record type. And that requires validation. It requires new reporting. So in doing that, it's not just one pick list value. We've identified a whole set of new requirements and validated the existing requirement. Or the third option might be, actually, genuinely, it is a new pick list value. So fantastic, we'll go and add that. So this idea of shift left is, yes, it feels like more work, but actually it's saving you work in the long term. And it's doing the work when it's way cheaper to fix problems. It's a lot easier to fix a problem if I understand if I change this pick list value, it will impact those 2 flows. It will impact those 2 screens. The system's down, people are shouting at you, you're running around with your hair on fire, if in fact you have any hair. So let's just think about DevOps Center and how that fits with the business analysis phase and the development phase versus how it works with change sets. In the old world with change sets, you had a change set that had metadata associated with it, and you had to go and add the metadata to every single change set. In the new world with DevOps Center, you have the concept of a work item that has metadata, but you can bundle work items. So instead of in the world of, say, a change set, when you first launched, say, a new application, that change set might have hundreds of metadata items. And I know many of you on the call will have gone that and said, I know it takes version 15 until I get the change set to go through. And it's late on a Friday night and everyone's left home. In the new world with DevOps Center, you can actually break those overall changes down into several work items with individual metadata associated with each work item. Then you can push all those work items together as the overall release or the overall change. So if I think about how we would relate this to the business analysis, we would have a release. A release has user stories. Those user stories have metadata. So again, these may be new concepts if you're used to just building a change set relatively simply and pushing it straight into through maybe from one sandbox into production. So if I think about how that works from an architectural perspective, so you can absolutely just implement DevOps Center and GitHub on its own. but I would suggest that you're missing an opportunity to actually drive a better way of working. Now, you don't have to use elements. I'm going to show you elements as from in terms of a user story, from an org analysis. If you're not using elements, doesn't matter, but please put something in place for managing those releases, the user stories, mapping the processes, and understanding the implications of changes. So a couple of things. You need to go and create a work item in DevOps Center. You need to create a work item that's connected to metadata items. If you're using Jira, and many people are, you're going to have to somehow keep Jira in sync with a work item, because the work items all work independently inside DevOps Center. So the integration that we've built is taking our existing elements capability, which is already synchronized with Jira, and that's the way that we are driving.
Hey, if you're not talking, just go on mute. Let me mute someone.
That's okay. It was. Let me just mute the last one. Okay. So if you are, if you're using Jira and DevOps Center, you're going to need something to try and tie all this together. But you're also going to need something to start to do that upfront business analysis if you're really going to get the benefits of this change to a new way of working. So what I want to do is just go and talk you through that implementation lifecycle using elements, but then also using DevOps Center. And this is the point where, again, at any point, stop me. We can ask questions about exactly what we're seeing. All right, so let's flip across to DevOps Center. So I'm going to start in elements, and then I'll go into DevOps Center. So I'll go through the logical steps that you would go through if you were taking a change around that cycle. So here I am in elements, excuse me. Elements, I've got this concept of, I've got a requirement here called, I want to capture partner stories. So that's my requirement. Someone's come in with, we are now working with our partners. We want to capture testimonials, video case studies, and we want some way of tracking those inside Salesforce. So here we're capturing our partner story. We've got some information about how important it is. You could add some documentation if you wanted to, some notes. So this is, you're starting to do the discovery about what the requirement's all about. Add a note, add a screenshot, or add a whiteboard if you've been working on a whiteboard. Add a link to a specification. So we need to capture all the stuff to do with a particular requirement. A requirement is not a user story. A requirement is the business need. What's the business trying to achieve? But a requirement may have one or many user stories. There's a user story, we want to capture the partner testimonial. As an AE, I want to be able to show a successful, show successful partners. So a requirement may have several user stories, and the user stories are what is related to a Jira ticket or Jira user story and a DevOps Center work item. So if you think about that architecture, releases go through, we have user stories are related to work items in DevOps Center. Okay, so let's go and look at a user story. Here are a set of user stories. One of those, we said we want to capture the partner testimonial. So now this is our user story. I could link it to Jira. So this is linked to the user story in Jira. I could obviously decide who's involved, the descriptions, some acceptance criteria, because of course, think about the user story also lives beyond the development because it's been used for user acceptance testing. I could think about the relative risk of any one of this user story. What's the impact risk? What's the complexity assessment? I could also think about which metadata items. So I'm not building them yet, but I can start to identify the metadata items that we think are likely to be changed by this user story. Well, the question is, well, why would I do this now? Why do this in the analysis phase? Well, at the analysis phase, I can start to work out how complex this particular user story might be, which then means we can allocate the right level of resource for both build and testing in the development teams. I can work out how I might group these user stories together in a release. If this is a really complex user story, I might group it with other complex user stories. I might have and therefore I could then pull out maybe some of the simpler user stories together into a release, which I could push through more quickly. And we'll talk about pipelines in a minute, but think of the idea that I'm trying to make sure my changes get through with the right level of testing, the right level of development, but as quickly as possible at the lowest possible risk. So at this point, I could start looking at, which metadata is going to be touched, or even this one over here. This is proposed. This is not even in the system yet, but at the analysis phase, I can start to identify new metadata items we think are going to need to be built. So when we pass the user story across to the developers, they've got as much information as possible, as much context as possible, reducing the ambiguity, so they can build whatever they need to build more quickly. This user story could have documentation. It could have notes from a workshop. It could have a whiteboard, maybe a wireframe. It could have an ERD. It could have a link to a specification. So we're already starting to populate this user story with valuable information. So when it makes its way over to the development team, they have more information to do a decent job. We may even have some discussions right here, not in email, right here inside the user story. And as I said, that user story is linked to Jira. Actually, I've already got it open. So therefore, there's the user story. This is in Jira. But if I open up the right panel, everything I've just shown you that was sitting in Elements is here inside Jira. So it doesn't matter where you're working, and you'll see this right panel pop up in DevOps Center as well. So it doesn't matter where you're working. You may be working in Jira, you may be working in Elements, you may be working in Salesforce DevOps Center. Everyone is talking about the same information. They're all talking about that same wireframe. They're all talking about the same specification. So I've now got some user stories. What I need to do now is group those user stories together as a release. So I have a number of releases. I've got this release called Build Partner Success. If I open that up, there are the user stories that are part of my release, 2016, 15, and 14. And this 14 was the one we've been looking at. So here you can see there are, because this is a user story, it's already pulling through all of the metadata. If I look at this one, this is showing the metadata that's being changed. Again, with any documentation I might have. The same for this one. Here are some notes. Here's the metadata that's being changed. Again, not a difficult concept. I've thought about my requirements. I've then just done the work to do the business analysis. I'm now building a user story, which is more than just a simple textual, a simple line on a spreadsheet. I'm now adding a lot more context. The beauty of that, grouping it together as a release, is I can now look at all the metadata across the whole release. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 user stories. All of those have got metadata associated with them. If I look at the metadata, this is the aggregate view. And what you can see here is that this top item has a conflict. What it's saying is this item called success story layout, not only is it in 2 user stories in that release, but it's also in another release. So I'm at risk here because I've got 2 different releases going in with that same bit of metadata. This one's only got an orange warning because it's being changed in 2 user stories, but they are in the same release. I'll just say that again slower. This one here is in 2 different releases, which is why it's got red. This metadata item is being changed by 2 different user stories. Same that one, same that one. These ones here are only in 1 user story. So we're doing that.
Just a question here. So this metadata, when you create stories, you're gonna feed those metadata along with that manually, or is it like a somehow fetched based on the changes and linked it?
So we, in the business analysis phase, we manually went and added these user stories. When we get into DevOps Center, let's go back, let's find that find a user story for you. That user story there, if there's this tab called DevOps Center, it will tell me which metadata items have been committed through that inside DevOps Center, or which ones haven't been changed yet.
Okay, so all the commits will track those.
Correct. So that list of metadata will then be synchronized in DevOps Center. So you may, in the business analysis phase, go, these are the things I think we need to change. When you get into development, you actually decide to change those things and others. But at least at this point here, you're now starting to see what the issues are about. You may go, I'm not ready to release yet, because, well, clearly the business analyst thought there were 2 other metadata items that needed to be changed. We haven't yet done the work to change them.
And if I have just a Jira, let's forget about Element Scout. So I would see the same, like a commits coming from DevOps Center directly in Jira, and I can.
No, there is no integration between Jira and DevOps Center.
Okay.
The only integration between the two is because of Elements. We already have an integration with Jira. The act of us connecting to DevOps Center means that all 3 are connected.
Okay.
An integration with DevOps Center, I know, is on their roadmap. I've no idea when that is. The DevOps Center is GA in about October time, they claim. So obviously, any future work will happen after that. I know the first item they've talked about is actually supporting Bitbucket. So I don't know when the DevOps a Jira integration will be on the roadmap, but it's certainly something they've talked about.
All right. Yeah.
I mean, it's the obvious thing that needs to happen because so many people use Jira.
Yeah.
Did I hear another question coming in? Okay. All right. So the question is also, how would I add all these metadata items? Do I have to go and find everyone? Not necessarily. You can go. We build what we call a dependency tree. So let me just show you one here. We build. Let's start there. Elements will synchronize all the metadata out of an org and build a dependency, a metadata dictionary for every org, production, sandbox, dev. It's hierarchical. So, I mean, these are all the Apex classes. If I click there, this right-hand panel will tell me about the Apex classes. And you can see we've got, I don't know, this thing says, where is this used? So we've got where used, we've got documentation, we've got the user stories that get touched. And for every different type of metadata, we've got a similar sort of structure. It gets more interesting when I get to an object. So let's go down to, say, where are we? Let's go down to a custom object. Obviously, we've got all the standard objects there. Let's go to a custom object called applicant. So we know who the stakeholders are. It tells you everything about the object, how many custom fields, how many record counts by record type. It tells you, we do an analysis of how important the fields are. Green ones mean they have data, they are being used in workflows, they're well used. Low means they have 0 data, but and they're not used anywhere. So we're assessing every single field. At the object level, you can even see how well populated every single field is. So we do this for you for every org every night. Same thing, add documentation. So you could add notes, you could draw process diagrams inside Elements, draw architecture diagrams and link them. And here you can see link to a user story. So the real power of this is all these different connections. Let me just go down a little bit further though. Let's just go down into applicant and then go down into, say, a field. So first of all, as I go down the fields, you can see there's one that's proposed. Doesn't exist in the org yet, but there's no reason why we shouldn't propose it and then start creating documentation. And then when that item gets created in the org, we'll connect the two. Because the problem was people were saying, in the analysis phase, I'm thinking about new things that need to be built, but I've got nowhere to document them, which is why we have the concept of proposed. So let's go down to, say, this field called earned value. We tell you what sort of field it is. I mean, this bit's all about how we optimizing it, how you can clean it up. What I want to do is here. This is now telling me there's no data by record type, but this field is used in 2 other fields, used in 7 page layouts. It's used in Pardot. It's used in 3 reports, 3 places in Slack, 3 validation rules, and it's not used in any of those places. And then these systems use it. So there's quite a long list there. What we also, though, really very nicely is we've got this concept of a dependency tree. So if you remember, we talked about how did we go and add all that metadata. So what I could do is I could, if I'm in a, well, let's see if I can find one. That's not right. Here we go. These are all, you remember all the different places it said it found things? Okay, so this is the single level view, but now that's used in 2 fields, but that field is now used in, okay, right. So that's used in 2 validation rules. So now you can start to see there are more and more things that I need to worry about. Okay, it's used in Slack, but then that Slack field is then used in another field, which is then used in another field. Let's pick one of these. So that's used in MuleSoft, which loads the record into NetSuite. NetSuite does something, but actually NetSuite pushes something back into one of the Salesforce fields. So you can now see we're getting quite a complicated structure. But what you can do is you can go around and every time I touch one of these, this right-hand panel appears, and I could go and add this to a user story. So instead of having to bounce away around the org trying to find things, we may work our way around this going, do I need to add this to the user story? And I could add it to the user story. So I could go and add this to number 14. If it would scroll for me. There you go. There you are. I've just added this to user story number 14. Or I could go to the user story, hit copy, and then just hit paste, paste, paste as I'm working my way around. So this is where I'm talking about a real understanding about the implications of making a change to an org. You may not have realized that this validation rule actually is, if I change this field called earned value, I need to think about this validation rule called burn down month. Or there is a report which then drives some dashboards. And I might need to go and think about a couple of those dashboards. And I want to go and add that one to my user story. So you can now start to see that's how you would connect these. Now, I know I spent a lot of time on elements, but this is about whether you use elements or not. I would recommend that you have a concept of a release, which is made up of user stories, and the user stories have got metadata. Because then you're able to push all of that into DevOps Center with the confidence that you're building the right things and the team, your development teams are in a position to go and start building without any misconceptions about what's required. Okay, so I've spent ages on that. Let's now look at where we move to DevOps Center. So if I'm in a user story, so let's say this user story 14, let me go and open that up. I'm in user story 14. Now I need to go and create a work item. So in user story 14, I can go to this tab here, DevOps Center, and I can create work item. And this is about partner objects. testimonial objects. I could enter a description, which is new build. And if I hit create, it's now going to DevOps Center. It's going to go and create a work item in DevOps Center. There we go, number 40 is linked to work item 40 in DevOps Center, status new, and it's not been assigned to an environment yet. Okay, so I've done my analysis. We're now going to look at DevOps Center. I'm now in the build phase. So here we are. Let's go into DevOps Center. So now let me pause there. Any questions before I launch into DevOps Center?
So is there any specific settings we have to do between Elements Cloud and DevOps Center in order to link those?
No. You install our DevOps Center managed package and it connects the two.
Okay.
Okay. Relatively simple to set up. Okay, so let's just think about, before we launch into doing things with that work item, let me just talk about the principles of DevOps Center. So the first thing is you have a pipeline. So you have a series of stages in a pipeline. Yeah, so here are the different stages. So these are all orgs. A UAT org, staging org, production org. You have some development orgs, but you won't see them on here. So you've got dev orgs. So each admin, each developer will have a dev org. They make their changes, and then I'll show you how they appear here. And then you can push them through from dev to UAT, staging, production, or whatever your orgs are. You can create multiple pipelines. So this happens to be the longer pipeline. You could create another project with a smaller pipeline. Let's see if it. So you can create multiple projects. Each project in DevOps Center is a pipeline. So the two things are synonymous. Actually, they both got 3 stages, so let's not worry about that. So again, back to thinking about how you implement DevOps Center. Now's the time to think about how you may have a streamlined pipeline, which is hotfix. You have a low risk pipeline where you put low risk changes through, which is maybe just UAT and straight into production. And you may have a high risk pipeline, which is a dev, UAT, integration, staging, then into production. So these concepts I'm talking about are DevOps Center concepts. A project has one pipeline. A pipeline has multiple orgs associated with it. And you go into the settings to set up all of the, this is where I'm telling DevOps Center about all of my orgs. So you would go and connect them. So it knows about the dev orgs, it just doesn't know, but it just doesn't show them. Any questions so far?
So this package is installed into the main org, and then you can configure rest of the org from there, right?
Correct. So you would install the DevOps Center managed package into your production org. It doesn't matter where it lives. It just has to live somewhere to manage all the flow of work. But the recommendation is that you put it in your production org.
Okay.
And think of the people who are managing it. They may be, it may be you've got a small team, so it's the admin, but think of having different hats. When you're doing things in DevOps Center, you've got a release manager hat on. So you may have other release managers. They have one of the relatively, I can't remember the title of it, but they will need a license in your org, but it's the same as a force.com license. It's a relatively cheap license, but they will need one of those licenses. They don't need a full system admin license to be a release manager using DevOps Center in that production org. So you won't have to buy another full Sales Cloud or sysadmin license. Okay, so we've got pipeline, we've got orgs, we put them into a pipeline, we can see all our pipelines. So the other concept is a work item. So if you remember, I created that work item automatically from, where's it gone? It was 41, wasn't it? Or was it 40?
40.
It was 40, was it? It was this one. Okay, thank you. Sorry, we did a demo so many times, I lose track of numbers. Right, okay, so there's the work item. And if you see, look here, this piece here that's just jumped out, that's elements. That's the integration. So everything that we talked about inside elements is now, there is the link back to the user story that's related back to this particular work item. So I can see the metadata that the business analyst suggested should be on there. I can see any documentation. I can see the discussions. I can see the risk. Okay. So the first thing I need to do is I need to link this particular work item to a dev org. And this, I'm going to link it to dev one. Because obviously the work item is just a description of the work. It's now created a branch for dev one. Okay. So now the teams can take the work on that work item and go and do the work in dev one. So there I am. I'm now in dev one. I'm going to go and create something new. I'll do something easy. I'll create a field. I'll create a text field. Maybe I'll create a multi-pick list. No, I won't. Okay. Right. So this is, I know, partner sign off. Uh, 100 characters. Is signing off the testimonial. Okay. Not always required. Okay, so I've created a new field. And obviously I'm going to add that field to profiles, and I'm going to add it to the testimonial layout. Okay. Very simple, again, but I just want to show the principles. So if I go back to DevOps Center, here I am in DevOps Center. I can now pull the changes. So it's now looking inside Dev 1 for anything that's changed since the last time I did a pull. And there we go. It's just identified that new field and that updated layout. So if you think about what you would normally do with change sets, is you go back and forth, adding things. The beauty of this is once I've created a work item, I can pull the changes. I could obviously also go and add other components manually if I knew that they needed to be added, because it didn't realize the changes had been made. I can add a description, which is a new field. And then I can say, I want to commit those changes. So what that's doing is it's now committing those changes. So it's now doing the work behind the scenes, pushing stuff between your org and the GitHub. Okay, so it's done. So it's done the commit. You can now create the review, which is inside GitHub. Now, if you're not using change requests inside GitHub, you can just ignore that. And now I'm ready to promote. So now what that's saying is I'm now ready to promote it from Dev 1 into the first org in my pipeline. So if I go to the pipeline, there is number 40. So you can see it's now ready to be promoted. I can now hit promote, and that's now going to push that work item into UAT. And again, behind the scenes, it's doing all that work, pushing stuff back and forth around GitHub. So at the same time, you may have your developers working directly in GitHub through the CLI or using scripts. This is working alongside, not in conflict, but alongside.
You might have done that really fast for me, but when you clicked on promoting, is that when you chose that you're going to be able to run all the tests that are related with Apex tests or anything else along those lines?
Yes, it will do all the tests that you would normally run, that you would run normally if you did a push to change set.
And does it do them by default, or do you choose if it's going to run select tests or all the tests?
I have no idea. That's a great question.
Yeah, you went really fast. I wasn't sure what it
Oh,
said.
sorry, yeah. So there we go.
Okay, there we go. Local all specified tests. And if you click on specified tests, you could just comma separate them, right? Yeah, that's usual.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Right, no problem at all. So now we're into UAT. Obviously, we're now going to do our testing. Now what happens is, if we said, hang on, there's some things we found which weren't quite right. I'm not happy with, you said it was a 100 character field and the spec said it was a 15 character field. This work item number 40, we've now got a problem because I can't change the work item now. It's already on its path. The only thing I can do is create a brand new work item. So if I wanted to go and make any changes to that metadata, I'd have to create a brand new work item. But with elements, I can do it from right here. So this is UAT fix. Thanks. So it's now here created me work item number 41. Without elements, you'd go back and you'd go and create a brand new work item. But the beauty of this is we're now relating 40 and 41 together associated with this user story. So this user story now has two work items associated with it. Again, this was quite a big deal for a lot of the customers who were using it through the pilot phases, because there's no way of relating work items together. This looks a bit weird because you've got 29 and 30. That's just because of a previous demo. But think about this, if this was new, 40 and 41, and I can see that 40 got promoted and it made it into UAT, and 41 is still new, it's not been assigned. So I can even look at it and work out what status we've got to in terms of that work. So I could go back into partner sign off, change it. Actually, it was only meant to be 80 characters. Back into DevOps Center. Let's go and have a look at work item 41. Sorry, open up. Work item 41. And then I can go around that cycle again. Work got done in Dev 1. All the changes. Those two again. Commit the changes. An interesting comment from John Eichstadt, who is the platform owner and the architect at Marcus & Millichap, a real estate company. He said, with a change set, you are amazed when it finally goes through. With DevOps Center, you're disappointed if it doesn't go through first time. Now, there are sometimes it doesn't go through first time, and I'll show you when we have problems. So I'm ready to promote. Back to my pipeline. There's 41. Push it through. Okay, so you can see the whole concept of relating work items. Well, there we go. So why did it fail? So layout failed due to custom field NDA found. Okay, so now we've got a problem, which is a classic problem, which is I pushed something which had a page layout which had not been updated because there was another piece of work that was going on. So this is where some of the GitHub errors aren't particularly friendly, and going back and then working out, okay, what else which other work items need to get pushed, or did I forget some metadata? Going back into our metadata dictionary and looking at what metadata, so you can start to do some analysis to understand why it failed. Those of you used to using change sets going, well, I never used to get these errors in change sets. That's just because it just pushed it through and it didn't care, and then the org broke. So at least we're getting a bit more early warning in terms of some of these errors. One other aspect that's important from this screen is this idea that the staging level org is called bundled. What that means is that when you get to staging, when I promote it, every single work item gets pushed at the same time. I don't have to select them manually. It just says whenever I promote it, everything that's in there gets pushed at the same time. So it's sort of a pseudo release, but actually it's more like it's an org where when I hit promote, everything gets promoted through to production. And that's called bundling, which again is a particular feature associated with DevOps Center. Anything else we need to think about? If I just go and have a look at that work item, as I said, in the right-hand panel, elements is popping up for you. I can get to the Jira ticket. I can see which other work items it's related to. I can see where they've got to. I could have a discussion.
Is this related at all to Agile Accelerator for Salesforce? I know they have work items, which is why I'm asking.
They took a view that they weren't going to integrate it to Agile Accelerator because Jira is probably the more dominant player. It must be on the roadmap for them to go and build an integration with their own product, Agile Accelerator. So don't think of Elements as competition with Agile Accelerator, because Elements is all about the front end business analysis, understand the org. It's a decision about whether you're using Agile Accelerator with DevOps Center or Jira with DevOps Center.
Okay, thank you.
The Jira is by far the most dominant of the applications that people use out there for. Now, there is a question about, we get some questions, customers going, well, if I've got Elements, do I need Jira? It's your choice. I mean, we are Elements in terms of the user story information is not as sophisticated as Jira, but some small organizations don't need it. So I've taken you through DevOps Center. A lot of people said, hang on, is that all there is? The answer is yes. It's a replacement for change sets. It's doing a lot of the heavy lifting around GitHub behind the scenes. Over time, it will become more sophisticated, but at the moment, it's not. There's no automation. There's no approach principle of CI/CD. There's no back promoting. There's no metadata backup. There's no integration with Jira. I'm sure those things will come over time, but they wanted to get the foundations right. They wanted to get this working well and get the principles. And over the course of the open beta between now and Dreamforce October time, get feedback from end users about what needs to be next in the pipeline. So there, if I just go back to my slide deck for a moment. There's a QR code there. There's a very active Trailblazer community. If you're a partner, consulting partner, then there's a Trailblazer community for partners. There's also one for customers. We also wrote an implementation guide. So it's about 40 odd pages where everything I've just talked about, we went into a lot more detail. And you can download that. There's no costs associated with that. Go to bit.ly DevOps Center or elements.cloud/DOC. And there's an implementation guide which gets into quite a bit of the detail, some of the implications. It has a element-centric slant, but again, if you're not using elements, you can look at what elements does as, say, best practice and work out how you're going to replicate that. Pricing, DevOps Center is free. Obviously, nothing is free in terms of it will take time and effort to implement, but there's no license cost associated with it. Future releases, so what I've shown you will be free forever, I've been told. Future releases there may be a cost. If they start adding Jira integrations or support for Bitbucket or Azure DevOps, there may be a cost, but again, I have no visibility over that. Elements, if you're a consultant, everything I've shown you is, if you're a consultant, it's $500 per year per consultant. If you're a Salesforce customer, it's 5% of what you spend on Salesforce. So the better deal you did with Salesforce, the cheaper it is for Elements. Happy to go into more detail or any other questions around business analysis, or go back and ask questions about DevOps Center.
So currently, DevOps Center capabilities are same as change state, right? Like the restrictions, what kind of metadata can be pulled in or pushed in, right?
Correct. Yeah, so if we go back to DevOps Center, as I said, it will pull the, I need a new work item on it, as I can't get. Let's create a new work item. If I create a new work item, then I can go and play and show you. Connect it to an org. Right, so I can pull changes as I did, but then if I click add components manually, I can start going through and adding other. So that gives you a view about the different types of metadata that it's looking for.
Okay.
Again, the implementation guide we wrote talks about how you set up the environment, setting up GitHub. DevOps Center has got a really good installation guide about the steps you have to go through to get DevOps Center working. But it starts with you go to setup, type in DevOps Center in the quick find and install the managed package. But obviously, it doesn't talk about what you need to do with GitHub. Our implementation guide steps you through what you need to do to set up GitHub. Oh, the good news is you can use the free tier of GitHub. You don't need to have a paid tier at the lowest level.
I had a question in GitHub. Can you verify the changes, like that it has gone through the branch?
You'll be able to go into GitHub and see everything as though you're a developer in GitHub. So all DevOps Center is doing is pushing metadata back and forth to GitHub. If you logged into GitHub, you could see everything that you would have seen if you'd done the commit through a script or pushed into GitHub. So was that answering your question?
So as a part of the workflow, do you verify that it has gone through correctly, or there's a conflict?
Oh, okay. So this point here, if you see here, this one didn't go through. So it's red. If I go and have a look at it and look at the activity history, there we go. It failed. This one was successful. Let's close that back off. These were all the ones that successfully made it through. It tells me which files got committed. This one failed. So the problem is that this is really only giving you the GitHub messages. So I know the DevOps Center team are looking at how they can trap some of those error messages and make them a bit more meaningful. At least tell you where to go and look. This one, I mean, you can work this one out. It's failed because the success story layout hasn't got the field success story sign off.
Sure, yeah, that answers my question. I just wanted to know if you could see the changes reflected in it.
There we go. Yeah. You can, I mean, you could set a dev org up, I guess, and start and play with it. You'll need, obviously, it's slightly more complicated because you're going to need to set up a pipeline. So you'll at least need a dev org and a production org to go and connect it to start using it, to start playing with it. But as you can see, it's relatively simple in terms of what we're, in terms of the demo. Pretty straightforward to set up, pretty straightforward in terms of understanding what it's doing. Probably the most complicated thing is actually just going through and setting up GitHub of all of the things. If you're not aware, if you're not used to using GitHub, go in, create an account, and you just got to think about what your account names are versus what the overall your username is, and just make sure you get that right. So I had another question. Okay, thanks for the demo. Right.
Yeah, I think I'm sure there will be a lot of things. This is just the foundation we are talking about, and there's a lot of roadmap Salesforce coming, and there'll be integrations. A lot of people we use Jira mostly for everything, and we need to see how that goes around with current Salesforce DX on CLI and how we do merge and all the source code and also fit into that. So it's a pretty good demo. At least visualize everything with Elements Cloud, and we can play around with what could be similar with the Jira. So yeah, thanks for that again.
So we have a concept of an elements playground. So you can connect elements to a dev org, and everything I've shown you, all those capabilities are available in that playground. So if you want to play around with mapping processes or building releases, building user stories, syncing an org and seeing about all that metadata, that's all available. The playground's free forever. It's just a single user, and it connects to a dev org. If you want to start looking at it for your own production org, happy to set up a trial area, and you can build a proof of concept. So reach out to the team at elements.cloud, or there's a button on the website which says book a call with somebody, so that they can then talk you through setting up a proof of concept. There's a different form if you're a consultant, but same idea, 2 different teams inside Elements.
Is the pricing different for nonprofits?
No, it's not, because it's tied to what you spend on Salesforce, then it automatically just ends up being the discount that you get from Salesforce applies to through to Elements.
Like Salesforce gives 10 licenses free, right? So
yeah, I think if anybody is at the level of 10 licenses free, then probably Elements is a bit of overkill. And I think most of the nonprofits we're dealing with are larger organizations. I think there is a minimum. I think that the minimum for a paid for customer, I think, is $5,000 a year. The minimum for a nonprofit is 2.5. So there's a lower entry point. So yeah, maybe even if you got 10 free licenses, $2,500 a year to get all the capability, unlimited capability for as many users as you want, actually isn't a bad answer. Bear in mind, it's not just Salesforce users could be using Elements. It could be any users in the org. mapping processes for other areas of the business not related to, not at all related to Salesforce.
As a futuristic plan, is there any other connector that Salesforce is thinking of to sync Jira with DevOps? Do you know?
That's on that. They said that's on the roadmap because so many people use Jira. No idea when. I think you'll find that the first thing they want to do is support other source control systems like Bitbucket. That's the thing. I think listening to Karen presenting, that's the thing that gets talked about most. But clearly, Jira integration is something on their roadmap. So at Dreamforce in September, I'm sure that there will be announcements about GA and then roadmap. So I'd look out for those there. I would assume that DevOps Center will be in the developer keynote, or maybe it's be in the admin keynote. There certainly will be sessions, hopefully that will be recorded. The sessions at TDX weren't recorded. Hopefully the DevOps sessions at Dreamforce will be recorded, and at that point, Karen and her team will be giving more visibility to roadmap items. Nothing will change in terms of what you're seeing now between now and probably GA. It's anything significant, but beyond GA in October, then look out for the sessions at Dreamforce.
Definitely, there will be a lot of updates on this in Dreamforce because they already did started on TDX and it's a big item. I know a lot of people use Copilot and all. That's pretty expensive. If you have gone that path, it's really expensive and it takes a lot. So this will be really good new stuff, which will be helping reducing the cost.
And it's long overdue. I mean, change sets have not had any love for 10 years. So this has been a long time coming. So it's fantastic it's here.
Yeah. So I guess if anyone has questions, we can stay around, talk about those. Otherwise, I'll take the screen. I'll pause the recording